Welcome to the event today. To first of all, to Sanskriti Kendra, which I'm sure a lot of you know about. Some of you who don't. Well, this is a foundation that was set up in 1979, and the center, as we see it today, was commissioned in 1993 by Mr. O.P. Jain, who's the founder. This was set up as a center for nurturing and preserving Indian culture and heritage. And so over the last 4 decades, Sanskriti has hosted artists, cultural practitioners as kind of residencies, and a lot of art that you see in this space has been made by people who lived here and made that art. I represent a studio called Quicksand that is a design consulting practice. Also a cultural platform called Unbox that are now residents of Sanskriti, trying to kind of revive some of the programming that Sanskriti had. So looking really at the plural futures of India and seeing how art and culture has a role to play in that. I'd like to invite you or welcome you to the event today, which is called Bharat, Leading Transformation by Design. A lot of you are connected to Transforming Rural India Foundation. This is part of the week-long celebration, which is called the India Rural Colloquy. We're hosting this event as part of that. So over the course of the next 2 hours, we'll take you through a journey and a conversation on how design can be located more firmly in this kind of ambition TRIF and its partners and all of you have around leading social transformation. And as a practice at Quicksand, we've had the privilege of being a part of that over the last 2 decades. Andre, who is going to be moderating the session and leading a lot of the conversations, has been involved with TRIF and also the organization that he represents, which is called Leap Design, along with some of the panelists who will join us online. We are trying to manage this as a hybrid physical and virtual event. So already I would kind of request some concession on glitches that might happen, but hopefully we'll center the conversations here. We'll have some of the ideas and provocations that our panelists will bring, and over 2 hours or thereabouts, hopefully walk away with some sort of a charter for what is the role that design has to play in social transformation. So with that, I would pass it to Anish to introduce himself and the event.
Thank you so much, Ayush. It's such a joy and privilege to be at Sanskriti and having Quicksand as a co-host for the evening today. You couldn't have a better, the gods have been smiling till now, but let's hope they keep smiling a little longer. And so lovely to see all of you, and thank you so much for taking the trouble. And it's truly a trouble today if you have been looking at the media. I have had 7 regrets now, people, and they are online, so thank you for joining online. But that's what is today, and there couldn't be a better time at looking at the discipline of the knowledge of design to solve some of our complex social challenges. In the community of people from design, it would be, I'm fish out of water, but that's where you get all your proteins. Unless, if they are in water, you don't get protein, right? So I'm useful that way, but I'll not speak about design. But I'll tell you how we got excited, interested in design, solving some of the complex developmental challenges that for me, for the last 30 years, I've been struggling, failing, mostly failing. And so I have looked at design to help me in that journey. So in 2016, Anirban and I came out of Pradhan, and together with Pradhan's and Tata Trust, we set up Transform Rural India. And as it happened then in 2016, as we were looking to solve complex integral systems, as sir you would say, challenges of rural India, we actually wanted to enroll for a program on design, and this was at Harvard and Ray, and we didn't have the money to enroll, and we wanted to do that course online, and because we didn't have the money, this is October 2016. As God would have willed it, in 2021, we met Patrick and Andre, and that was our first conversation in September 2019. We just fell in love with each other, and as Patrick keeps saying, that they had a grant from Gates to explore whether they like TRI or not. And as it happened, the relationship we gained immensely from the world of design that Patrick and Andre brought to TRI and to our colleagues. And we started applying it in our work in the villages, and we found it has enormous potential to solve some of the things that we have always struggled, be it issues of governance, the institutions, or for that matter, building enterprise solutions. It has defied all logics. The other day I was talking on enterprise, and I was looking at Shyama Prasad Mukherjee's 1948 industrial policy. We haven't gone beyond that, and I keep telling our friends from the not other side, it's unfair to say this side only, that now that you had the first industry minister, you got to do something about rural. But design, I think, and we are working in Chhattisgarh on solving or exploring ways on rural industries. And I'm very happy that in this very illustrious setting today, we will talk about how design could, if not challenge, just as in 1851, which Patrick and Andre keeps reminding us, the Crystal Palace and the Great Exhibition. So I keep telling him, Paxton, who built that Crystal Palace, so he actually came from a very humble background. While he did manage the gardens and glass houses he built, but that was a fabulous structure. It had 4,000 odd tons of steel, just a quarter of what Eiffel Tower had then, and it transformed the world as we know today. Andre wants us to connect to the world of creative economy where producers and consumers were connected, not in the way that we are connected today, what the Industrial Revolution 1, 2, 3, 4 has brought. And that's where we think there is an opportunity for rural renaissance. The theme for this year's colloquy, and I was telling Ayush if, why we do colloquy between 1 to 8 August is by itself a kind of inspiration to us in our reckoning. Quit India or August Revolution, as you call, was the first ever and the largest mobilization of communities. After that, total revolution, Jayaprakash Narayan, did happen, but not at that scale. The Quit India movement was of a scale, enormous scale in the quest for freedom, dignity, and where the leaders had to listen. And that's the great thing about Quit India was that you had a Gandhi on 9th August, Ramadan, giving that call for do or die. So the upswell of the ground was what, and for freedom, dignity, was that, epitomizes that in more ways. We do celebrate French Revolution and what have you, but after French Revolution you had, the Napoleon, and post that, whatever happened, we know how much time they took to come back to a constitutional state of things, but after 42 you had 47 and 50 in India. And that's the power of Quit India, and that's where we connect the colloquy week with the Quit India. And Renaissance in some ways brought in dignity of labor, which I guess today is the most challenging thing if you look at rural India, and that's how these two come together. And I could not have thought of a better theme to unlock the opportunity that Renaissance presents, the Crystal Palace, with all its allure of technology, machinery presence, and the new world that beckons us come together. So with that, I will again, on behalf of TRI, welcome all of you to this evening, and I'm sure you will be stimulated by much finer, better minds on design than me. Andre, over to you.
Thank you, Anish. Thank you very much. Thank you, Good Send, for hosting us, being part of this. My name is Andre Nogueira. I am a Deputy Director of the Design Laboratory at the Harvard School of Public Health. Patrick is going to likely talk a little bit about this movement of bringing design to public health. And I'm also working with TRI and a fantastic group of people here with Samir, Kartik, Prapti, Nilima, exploring ways to bring, in whatever way that it's useful, the work that we've been developing there and here into a more structured and formalized commitment to the application in India. I will not take too much time. We are running a little bit late already, and there's people online. So I would like to welcome Sarah and Patrick to the screen. I don't know if you, there it is, Patrick and Sarah. So Patrick is a director of the Design Laboratory at Harvard PhD School of Public Health, but he also holds a professor in residence position. And Sarah is the Dean of the Nursing School at Johns Hopkins University. So the session, this part of the conversation today is about this notion of the reach of the network and how design capability today is distributed not only in India but also globally. You can go to almost all states in India and you have a college, a university teaching design. Yet, it's quite hard for us to activate that capability in a structured and intentional manner to reach the types of issues that we've been getting at scale that we have with the speed that they are evolving and changing. So I would like to start with Sarah. And Sarah, just share a little bit about your experience in bringing design to promote social transformations and to, especially, of course, in the area of mercy and health. And thank you very much, both of you, for being here.
Thank you. I'm just confirming you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, wonderful. So I wish I could be there with you all. It looks fabulous. And thank you for inviting me. As Andre mentioned, I'm the Dean of the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing, which is the leading school of nursing in the United States. And in health research, people tend to develop an idea or a program or an intervention or a hypothesis and then just test it. And usually it's based on some theory and some insight. But then if it doesn't work, they move on. And I was fortunate enough to develop an intervention called Capable for older adults to be able to age at home that involves improving their abilities and also the environment around them. And that did work. But as we started to spread it, to scale it to other states and other payers, other places to do it, we found it was very hard to get other people to use our principles, where the older adult is always in charge. It's about what they want and not what the clinicians want. And so we turned to human-centered design to try to understand how might we work with new nurses, new occupational therapists, new home care agencies, new states, in ways that they can stick to the fundamental aspects of the program while growing it to fit their needs. And in the course of that, I really fell in love with a lot of the principles of human-centered design in terms of being able to really understand both what the issues are and how to move forward. And so one aspect of that is I later wrote grant for our whole school before I was dean, in which we had a human-centered designer as a resource for the whole school, just the way you might have a statistician or a communications person. And we require that junior faculty work with this human-centered design fellow as they develop their ideas, so that it's more iterative. It's working back and forth with who would be involved and who are the stakeholders. And that's important to build it as an infrastructure, because it's not fundable by other, by National Institutes of Health, or it's not a period of time when you're trying to address a problem and figure out what you would do is not traditionally fundable. Funders want you to have a solution that already, some idea works. And so then as I've become dean, we've now built a little bit more of an infrastructure in the school, so that as a school we provide it knowing that the solutions will be better and more scalable and will work better with stakeholders than if an idea just comes out of someone's head and they seek to bring it straight from their head out to the community. So that's kind of a short version of the journey that we've been on, and I'm very happy to turn it over to Patrick now, and we will, I know we'll discuss later.
Thank you, Sarah, and such a interesting point of view and challenges to face in terms of not only bringing into the benefits of a specific project, but then also how do you then create an infrastructure for that support, so that you're shifting conditions upon which healthcare projects get thought of, delivered to, and scaled, right? So, Patrick, over to you. You've been working a little bit in this space, just a little, over the last couple of years.
Thank you, Sarah, for the remarks. It makes a lot of sense and kicking off an event like this. Delighted to be here, to be doing what I can, and it's amazing to think back to the beginning of this that Manish mentioned, and see how far we've come. Design is one of those interesting crossroads. It's probably never has been more accepted by leaders of not-for-profit groups, government groups, major companies. It's hard to think of a major company that cares about consumers that doesn't do design now.
Patrick, I think your audio is a bit muffled, so it's being hard a little bit to talk. So maybe if you get closer.
That better?
Yes, but now you got an echo.
Should be gone. Is that gone?
Yes, but now your video is gone. Now you're out. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Yes, much better.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry for that. I was just saying it's a remarkable time for design because it's never been so well accepted by leaders of organizations like Sarah, who runs a leading nursing school in the States. But it is claiming to me, it's expected to do projects that traditional management consulting and research and methods from the social sciences haven't been able to deal with. for some of the reasons Sarah said. They expect to know what the answer is before you start the research. They expect to know what the result is before you start a problem. And that works when you live in a highly predictable world where users more or less want the same thing. Companies make more or less the same thing from year to year. And change is not radical. The design has capabilities that can help with this, but it doesn't know it. It doesn't, design itself doesn't teach these methods in a way that people recognize. People think design is taught by teaching people how to draw, how to do user research, how to explore different futures. And those things are real, but they're informal. And what design is missing as a discipline is the formalization of the informal design knowledge into formal knowledge that can be understood by other people, partners, clients, employees, and designers themselves. For example, there is no theory of prototyping that everyone agrees to in the field of design. We all do use prototypes, but there is no language or definition of what the different types of prototyping are. People use the word user experience all the time, but can't tell you what it is other than to be like Apple or be like a neighborhood bank in the green community. We need to develop a theory and methods that that can be inclusive and bring people in from other fields to solve these complex problems. The last point is the way to illustrate the decision is our choices whether to move away from what I call the gerbil wheel of design, where we spend a lot of energy staying in the same place, versus having a pathway where we intend to go and how we intend to get better, and how we and have an idea of progress. So our work moves us forward into a direction that becomes clearer as we get towards it, rather than keep it spinning in the same way we've been working in the past. So I'll leave it there and see where the questions take us.
Yes, your experience, right, in bringing design to your work, and it's research, it's evidence-based, right, it's research structured, and what were some challenges or some benefits that you found in your work when engaging with design, and assuming that elements of that will be, this aspect of informality or this fuzziness of understanding how do you connect knowledge being produced there to the knowledge being produced through the more formal structures of science, right?
Yeah, great question. I think a number of the challenges are related to, as my voice too loud? You guys see me? Okay, someone said it was too loud. The challenges that we face are related to it being a slightly separate or kind of diagonal to traditional academic research. And so, other NGOs might not have that trouble, but, two small examples. One is because it slows things down, that can get in the way of progress for someone to be able to progress to the next stage of their career. People talk about publish or perish or up or out, in academia, where you need to get a lot of momentum as a junior faculty and sort of succeed quickly. And our folks who are using human-centered design are succeeding fantastically, but not quickly. And there's a lot of mini successes along the way, but they're not necessarily ones that are recognized by everyone. The second challenge is, in academia, there's ethics boards to make sure that to make sure that what the research is ethical. And of course, this kind of work is very ethical. It's centering the people who have whatever the issues are that the research is trying to work with. Yet it's not, the IRB is taking a lot of training about why you can't say already what you're going to be doing. You can say the beginning steps and how to manage that from an infrastructure point of view. But in terms of successes, to a person, every single person who we've had work with the human-centered designers say, oh my goodness, why haven't we doing this way all the time? And especially, it takes them a minute to realize we're not talking about visual design. It's not like, oh, can you make a flyer for me? And so that takes a little bit of understanding. But in general, so I would say that the theme is it takes away some from momentum, but it makes us a stronger, steadier momentum, and we just have to change around that.
Yeah, Patrick, some of these sound familiar of what we've been engaging at Harvard for the last couple of years. Do you want to share some of these?
And the phrase is like, if you can't count it, you can't manage it. The phrase, if you can't count it, it doesn't count, which goes directly against Einstein saying that sometimes things that don't count, some things you can't count. I think back to Thomas Kuhn and Karl Popper debate. They were historians and philosophers of science. Popper was an advocate of the type of science that Sarah described, that make sure everything is right and perfect before they move ahead. Kuhn says yes, that's frequently the case, but there's something called normal science and revolutionary science, paradigm change science. And that's when one sees mistakes, sees value in things that were discarded as error in previous sessions, ties it to new principles, and has breakthroughs in science. This is where the tying together of the research of people like Robert Fulton and Louis Pasteur makes so much sense, and that they developed theory while they were solving problems. They didn't view solving a problem as at the other end of the scale of theory development. They would build theory and build solutions to serious problems at the same time. Design needs to develop that capability. The theoreticians discount practice, and the practitioners discount theory. That is not moving the field forward or solving problems.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've been finding or learning about as we continue to engage, with Sarah in this journey, is that the field, out of many fields of expertise within the health, nursing might be one that it's very closer to the knowledge of design, in the sense of it's so close to people and it's so focused on the care that design can learn from it a lot, and hopefully contribute a little bit to this human.
Sorry, Andre. When you think of it, medicine is about centering on the disease, the science of what's right and wrong with the health of the biology of the person. Public health is centered on populations. We look at statistics. I was working with colleagues at Harvard who were starting studying home study, and they were trying to pick which databases they were going to use. And it struck me as we went through the project that no one was going to go into someone's home, and it was about home health care. How can you study home health care if you don't go into a person's home? Whereas nursing doesn't emphasize science of biology as much as care, and it doesn't look at the statistics of populations as much as care. And care could be at the core of the next human-centeredness.
Well, I'll just jump in, and I think you did a great job of saying that, but I want to, just for the listeners, we view prevention as part of that care. You know, I'm sure you probably thought of that as well, but just we like to think about the prevention and care. But I agree that we are the closest, and to your point about theory and practice, there's a lot of neuroscientists who created theory and are deeply embedded in practice. We have a resilience theory that's a kind of a structural society to cells. Resilience theory from 2010, for example, that I've then used to develop capable and other interventions that we've done. So I do think that design and nursing could do a lot together to move both fields forward.
And if you go back to Florence Nightingale, she was a pretty good job of combining practical application and people better with theory.
So,
John's
and here in the audience, we have Shamal. Where are you, Shamal? Oh, right here. So Shamal is affiliated with TRIF, is a director at TRIF, and it's leading many health work across India in different states and levels. And one of the questions and one of the initiatives that he has is exploring this notion of bringing design knowledge into nursing education and practice in the state of Jharkhand, right? So do you want to quickly share a little bit? And
so, if we look at entire healthcare ecosystem here, nurses play a very critical role. If we look at it, we have divided into three parts. One part is that how we'll be delivering once the patient is entering into a health facilities. So within the facility. The second part is that once the nurse is going to the public health system program, taking the services to the community setting, this is outreach services. And third is that love and care. I'll definitely focus into that prevention, but in healthcare, which we miss is about love. So how that love and care will create a conducive environment for the patient, so that they can get out of it that whatever agony he or she has. At the same time, that preventive part of it. So what we're trying to do here is that again to look into in two parts. One is that once the nurses are going through the courses or the training, it's a specialized training. So how to integrate the design thinking within that entire curricula, so that the pieces of the design knowledge can be integrated at the time of the courses. That is one. Second step is that after deploying in a job, is a regular process to enhance the skills and also the other things. So how during that ongoing training program it has been integrated. And more than that, what is important is that once the nurse has been placed in a small nursing home or in a public healthcare system at the very remote areas, how she is interacting with the patient. So that the behavioral part of it. So managing that currents within the facilities, and again that interacting with the communities within the facility and outside the facilities, and creating that overall journey of a patient a more, what I'll say that it's a more friendly, people friendly, woman friendly, child friendly, and other way it is a fitting to the community setting. So this is the overall notions which are looking that where that entire design thinking and the design principle can be applied in two ways. One way is that how we'll be helping the nurses to deliver better, that is one. And second, I will go back to my first word, that how this human interaction with these people or the patient or the communities, not always the patient, the communities, and or the care seeker and the caregiver. So how journey of a care seeker can be more appropriate, more friendly, so that they can be accepting it in a culturally benefited or culturally suited special areas, because the areas where we work that is dominated by tribal people, women, and the many other challenges which are societal. So how we will be looking at it in a different way, that how these principles can be applied to make it much better. Over to you, Andrew.
so, Sarah, I know you have a very busy agenda, and your probably next event has already started. So I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And I will
Great to be there.
I'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.
And then Patrick, I wanted to just tap a little bit into your brain to explore some of the questions that Shema was just presenting around the experiences of the caregiver, the experience of the patient, and the experience of care seeking and care provisioning behaviors and design in that space.
I think the complexity of a situation becomes apparent as soon as you start to work on it directly with the users. The projects always seem simpler at the beginning when they're defined. Let's make nurses care more. Let's make nurses pay more attention to patients. That seems easy. Go talk to the nurse about how we can treat patients now and talk to them about how we can improve it. But it doesn't work that way. As soon as you step into seeing how people actually use the objects, environments, messages, and services in their environment, then you notice that the problem is a lot more complicated than you thought. This happens every time. So getting the participants involved directly with each other, solving the problem together with other people who have other cares, and very importantly, have different points of view at the table, at the discussion, at the very beginning. It is way easier to fix surprises in projects at the beginning than towards the end. And it's essential to bring people in at the beginning. The other thing that we can do as a community to help solve misconceptions is to realize that making things, doing things, trying prototypes is a way of thinking. It's a way for individuals to think, but more importantly, doing things is a way for a group to think about things. And we would do ourselves all a favor in what we're trying to do if we would do away with the phrase design thinking. It implies that design doing is not thoughtful. It implies that sitting back and talking about something and analyzing it is the way to start a project, not take early cheap guesses at what might provide insights about what you really need. Design thinking is not just a silly term in that it doesn't get at the real meaning of what designers do. It disposes with the idea of doing as being a valuable way to think, which is one of the main things that designers bring to the party. So they've been writing about design thinking. And my success at this event if we reduce the use of the word by 50% this coming year.
Fantastic. Patrick, do you have 5-10 more minutes there? If anybody wants to ask Patrick a question before we turn into our general conversations. No, I think the audience is still reflecting on the things you shared and the insights you're providing. So I would like to thank you, Patrick, for joining us and giving us your time and insights around making as a way of thinking, around structuring design knowledge, and the importance of that as a way to invite to be more inclusive as a practice. This
is a final comment. The people that Transform Millennium works with and works for are living in many respects in a pre-industrial, pre-Crystal Palace One world where they see a direct effect on the work that gets done today and how it influences their lives tomorrow. And as the world, the modern world, the industrialized world, moves forward to overcome the problems that came along with mass production, mass consumption, mass use of materials, mass pollution. As the world moves forward and trying to solve those problems and brings design into it, the way design works and the way design thinks and the way design does things is a way of thinking can make all the difference in the world. And it's a way of, I don't know exactly how we're going to pull this off, but with the energy of the people that transform India, the energy of people like you who come to this event, we can find a way to take advantage of the pre-industrial lives of the villagers, increasing their economic benefit, but also not doing it at the expense of daily life that has caused so many people to suffer because of mass production, we're going to need those things, but we need to do them with much more benefit for the environment and for people. And design can make that difference.
Thank you. Thank you.
You, Andre?
So we have a little bit about 5 to 10 minutes to generate just to have a general conversation amongst ourselves. I think that one of the things that we are trying to do this is to have some of these lining conversations and then general reflections in the room, so we are not isolated reflecting on ourselves and thinking through these problems in a silo manner. So
Hi, my name is Sabisaj. I've been a design consultant for about 25 years, and now I'm trying to be an academician. So, as part of the design consultancy, we suddenly got roped into a project that was the Mohalla Clinic. The health minister, who at that point of time was recently elected, I think this was about 2014 or something, remembered what I had probably said in class. He was an architect, so we had taught them in SPA. And I suddenly got this call saying that the honorable minister would want to speak to you. I thought it was a crank call, frankly. But they had an idea that they would like to have these community clinics, what is known as a Mohalla clinic. Mohalla is a community. And he wanted doctors there, imported in from the municipal hospitals. I had recently, prior to that, worked on something called a Swasthya slate. So it was like a health slate that could do about 33 diagnostic tests in a matter of minutes, including 12-channel ECG. So I told him that just having a doctor will not really suffice because of the state of society that you are kind of dealing with. So you need immediate diagnostics. So the doctor was the first D, diagnostics was 2D. And I told him that they need to carry medication back with them. We need to close the entire loop. Because if we don't do that, if he just writes an RX basis the diagnostics, we'll be kind of leaving it undone. So credit where it's due, he actually decided to include a pharmacy within the Mohalla clinic itself. So we designers are in love with 3D, so we kind of called it a 3D design. So doctor, diagnostics, and for alliteration, drugs. But it kind of really spread, and I think in the last about 9 years or so, has catered to about millions of people. But as I kept kind of following it, I could see that there are as Patrick said, it's not a silver bullet. There are complications. One of the complications is there was no institutional memory. So we completely relied on a doctor at a particular clinic to remember the past of a certain patient. And there were hundreds of them. Hats off how the doctors do it, but they do. So what we need to the 3D model is actually we need one more D, and that is data. So even if the doctors change, why can't the data be carried with the patient? Maybe on the cloud, but should be there. And looking at the way it is being implemented, and now it's being also being copied in other states as well, and it's become a very good electoral promise. So we also need to do the 5th D, and that I think should be designed. So I guess, we just the Mohalla clinic per se can be a fantastic model to attack the kind of problems that we face with very primary healthcare in countries like ours. Yeah, so that's what I want to kind of share with you. I've also kind of seen a couple of doctors who got fantastic ability and expertise. But what we need to do, I guess, in this country is not less but more technology. I'll just give you a very small example before I end. So I recently met up with a neurosurgeon who told me that he can immediately diagnose what a patient is suffering from in the 2 steps that they take from the door to the chair. Now, can we kind of utilize that level of expertise through AI ML? It's pretty much possible. Right now, I'm trying to work on a digital stethoscope that can be used by an A&M worker or an ASHA worker, and by the cuff and the sound of it, can immediately say or kind of predict whether a patient has got TB or not. So what I feel we need in this country and countries like ours is technology at scale, at population scale. That is how we're probably going to target and achieve our goals. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. You really got me going. But I understood what my question is. Hearing Sarah, where she talked about starting with care in a family, in a community, and how that's been a very difficult idea to sell in, let's say, the US, countries where you've got highly developed healthcare systems, formal healthcare systems. Now, all the research and science in healthcare, especially done in the last 5 years, when the problems of due to COVID and isolation came out, that actually people in countries like the US, which had the most expensive, well-organized, well-researched scientific healthcare, suffered much more. And she gave examples of Southeast Asia. And research had been there for many years, that the health of a person depends on the health of the community. It's the quality of the locality and the system of the locality that determines an individual's health, And it's remarkable, these studies, have been there for 20 years, social determinants of health, that in Glasgow, it started with Michael Marmot, researching on the ground that within the city of Glasgow, which you would say is otherwise economically the same country, same National Health Service, the longevity of people in one part of Glasgow was about 15 years less than in other parts. In London, more recently, they've sort of validated, and all around the world, that local conditions of the community are a much more powerful indicator of the conditions of every individual in the community. So we have to concentrate on the health of the system, not the health of the individual. And as I said, the US Academy of Medicine and US Academy of Sciences, of which it is a part, have done this wonderful study in this last 3 or 4 years about changing the paradigm. This is the whole paradigm of progress is improve the health of individuals, incomes of individuals, okay? Not the condition of the, let me say, the economy, the society. We are focusing on the individual. And so in the examples that you gave, it was the doctor coming in who's trained to look at the body of one individual, do the diagnostics of one body with finer technology, and then to treat that body. And then we will over time notice that many individuals' health has improved. But the connection between, that's the examples that I gave, there's another way to do it, is that improve the health of the community, which is far less expensive and does not require technology, which comes to the caring part, which was mentioned by you, the caring part. You know, love and care. What technology do you use to do that? In fact, when you make it technical, you are removing that altogether. You think the solution is going to be provided by what you do and not by what you feel. So I just wanted to put out that this is the point again. And finally, you know, Patrick is still here. Patrick, and I thought I'd save it for our philosophical discussions. He did ask us to think about this. He says, when we go into a community, there is some knowledge there. To us, it appears informal. So we have to change we designers or scientists have to change the informal knowledge to formal knowledge. So I already got a presumption in my mind of what is the correct form of knowledge. That is the problem. Science is based on that there's certain things which you must know, and mathematics is about a certain way of putting the things together. All maths is how you put things together. A certain algorithm must be used, and only if that algorithm produces an answer is it a scientific solution. So this is a very deep thing, and I come to, therefore, what does a designer do to his question? I don't think a designer should do anything.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you for your thoughts, and thank you for sharing your experience with the community clinics. I think that one of the things that I would like to invite Ayush and Sonia here to talk about and to discuss a little bit is this notion of how they have been leveraging design and utilizing design in complex environments in a multidisciplinary manner, and working towards shifting the conditions within which new solutions can emerge. Not necessarily providing specific answers, but finding ways to explore where design can contribute so that new conditions are in place. One of the things that was discussed a little bit on conversations yesterday from the Colloquy was this notion of investing on understanding the demand side, and how a lot of health efforts and development efforts have been dedicated to investing on the supply side, supply of knowledge, supply of medication, technology distribution, but the understanding of the demand aspect of this, where the community systems or business opportunity, etc., might be a beneficial point. So understanding design, working at the intersection of these two parts of the making and the using of systems, I think that I would like to invite Ayush and Sonia to join me here to discuss a little bit about their work. So Ayush is one of the co-founders of Quicksand, this building behind here, the court here where we are. I've been doing fantastic work over the last 2 decades or so. And Sonia is a co-founder of Spread Design, who is in Bangalore, based in Bangalore, and is also been doing, has worked with Carlos, who will be joining us here pretty soon, and would like to share their work. So Sonia, I'd like to start with you on the work that you've done with the millets, and all the movement around the year of millets, and how that might have benefited from the seeds and the work that you've done, and then you can elaborate a little bit more on the other types of work you've done. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Andrea. It's really wonderful, and it's to be able to sit outside like this and actually take in the atmosphere is amazing. Thank you, also, Ayush. Um, I love the fact that all the conversation went towards love, people falling in love with design and designerly ways of working. Um, and I truly believe in our work, especially the way we look at things, is that you can't solve a problem unless you feel for it. So the thinking bit, I mean, it's something we debunk all the time in our work. It's about you have to feel for it. You have to really want to change something. So to Arun's point of designers should do nothing, I feel designers should feel. They should have hope. They should have a lot of optimism, and then not be leaders, but just be catalysts. So therefore, I'd like to first talk a little bit about a particular project where we were able to sort of do this kind of work, where the activation of design knowledge, practices, systems, tools, methods, all of that help pathways. All of that, what it does is it enables a balancing of the head, heart, and hand. All three are important. And sometimes, especially when you need to act at scale and speed, we can just come in as really the humble designers of the system, which enables people to come together and activate everyone. So one of our projects, something that Carlos and I did together, and which gained global recognition, was really in that space. So what we learned was that, be it actually creating new models for citizen-centric development, or large-scale cultural shifts, or behavior change, all of this needs this kind of knowledge. And that's where what we know and how we put it together. We create a system, I'm sure even you do that, for every project to create a whole new system to first immerse and understand. So Dreaming was a system we created to actually ignite a spirit of inquiry and create imagination at the scale of nations. And finally, to be able to create new ventures, new models, new project ideas, new solutions for impact. So the way this works is that we had Dream Journeys, where young people trained in ethnography and design research went out there as dream catchers. They went out there, they understood the aspirations of people. And we created a tool that they learned. They learned to sit down and have a chai with people and reflect together. And really, you can learn so much when you have a chai and an honest chat. You sit down and you talk to people. And we created a system that was both quantitative and qualitative. Each dream had a lot of substance in it. And this was done, the Dream Journeys were across Brazil, China, India. And there were conclaves after that, where people absorbed the dreams together. We brought in leaders. So there were overall, I think some 1,000+ student volunteers, 100+ leaders who became part of this in industry and policy, to actually reflect on the dreams, absorb the dreams, find the insights, to then start using design methods to create scenarios, create solutions, and take it back into their work. So this actually became a model for a project in Curitiba, and then became my Green Dream campaign across the world at Rio +20 that was launched. It was just, let's shift the focus to people's dreams, and let's not focus on needs, because that's their future that they're thinking about. So can we do something like that? And it's just about conversation and people. So the work in millets, for instance, was in 2013, the Karnataka Agriculture Minister sat down with the subsistence farmers, really the lowest level of farmers, and encouraged them to grow millets because they're climate smart, and to grow organics because the value realization is higher. By 2017, when the crops were ready, 10 days before a fair, the realization struck that there is no market for millets. People don't know what's millets. People don't care. So we created an awareness campaign which was both from the heart and also very logical. We took all the information about millets, we call them food stamps. We made messages and we put it out everywhere. And the campaign was Let's Millet. So, and we got influencers and various people, a very frugal kind of project, but very high impact because everybody was talking about millet suddenly. There was a national trade fair, there was an international trade fair, another international trade fair. Farmers were trained, they formed farmer groups, they were trained to negotiate, they were trained to actually take this forward and get orders from all over the world. Now 2023 year of millets, with India taking a very strong global position. And I'm sure everybody in this audience knows what's millets. Do you? Has anybody not heard about millets? Because we were in a position where nobody knew what was millets. And the way we needed to do this, to create the supply was there, but there was no demand. Millets were there in the past, we had to bring them into the future. You know, and the way we had to position this, just understanding human psychology, that first it's good for your health, second it's good for the planet, and third it's good for the farmer. And the problem we were really solving was the problem of farmer suicides. So to create this kind of a shift, you just have to work with individual psychology. We learned group behavior, how do people behave in groups, and community cultures. How do you shift those cultures? So systematically, if you go about doing that, you know, if I can I explain one more example? So another example was the work we did with the rural department in Karnataka on behavior change around wastewater and sanitation. You know, 70 lakh plus toilets were built by the government and the state was declared ODF, an open defecation free, just because the toilets were built. But see, the thing is, there's not even a word for going to the toilet in Karnataka. We don't even talk about it. They just say, I'm going outside. So we had to understand that and work towards a very long-term behavior change kind of project, going across the villages. 30,000 villages in Karnataka had to be impacted. Going across all of these places and understanding what needed to be done to slowly engineer this change involving every possible stakeholder. So children became the ambassadors of change. So the system was designed so that everybody on ground is activated. You know, children were the health ministers. They were the ones in schools helping everyone take an oath around and checking things. The women became the torch bearers. You know, the workers from the department became the digital Swachhagrahis, whose job was to send out good morning messages about, you know, about the positive stories and engineer that change to finally create a whole system and brand and program to be able to create the change. And, you know, literally even local painters across the villages, we created these messages which could be painted on, literally making the medium the message, and by local artists. So they actually protect that work. So all of that was communicating, connecting, because ultimately what happens is everybody's trying to solve a problem at the individual level, at the ministerial level, at the local worker level, but they're all approaching it in different ways. It's like the blind man and the elephant. So I think what design systems do and maybe can help do is help shine the light and remove the blindfolds. Actually go find out, investigate, you know, and then understand properly. And then of course create many systems, ideas, interventions, programs that are measurable to be able to create that change. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Sonia. Ayush, you're going to share a little bit about the work that you've been doing and how you've been bringing some of these understandings, not only about like what Sonia was talking about, the questions around shifting conditions. I think that a lot of your work is around that too, but also around this notion of a structured and multidisciplinary use of design, because your team is highly multidisciplinary too.
Thank you. First off, I have to admit that being a panelist at an event that you're producing is incredibly hard. So I just want to do a quick check to see if everyone's comfortable. Can we turn on the fans? Or yes? Okay. So can we please turn on the fans? Yeah. Great. So sorry, while I was thinking of figuring out what to speak about, I was also just looking at the nuts and bolts of the event. Anyway, so Quicksand, the design consulting firm that I co-founded in 2004, has been working for about 2 decades in the field of applying design methods to complex systems of oftentimes redesigning public services. We work with government, we work with multilaterals to figure out how the lived experience of citizens can actually be centered in the decision-making process of designing or redesigning public systems or public services. So, Andre, I want to kind of respond to a provocation you shared with me, which was about diversity and scalability as being two opposites, and how design can help reconcile that. I think you also stated, and it's in that little booklet you have, which is that design as a discipline gained recognition in an era where it was in the service of standardization, right? So the entire kind of industrial revolution and and how design actually played a role in building more efficient systems, products, services that could be distributed across the globe, remote parts of the globe, primarily making an assumption around what is the lowest common denominator that you need to design for, right? And that's, if you look at the last 100 years, that's been the era of recognition for design. And therefore, when you talk about diversity and scale and design trying to reconcile that, I'm not quite sure that design has the answer for it necessarily. And I feel, that's a question we often ask ourselves, right? Like, what is the role that design has to play? And I think, there are certain methods of design which could be in the realm of, certain kind of creative experimentation. This idea of facilitating exchange and dialogue between stakeholders and communities, that I feel somewhere the answer lies in terms of how design can help chart that. As an example, I want to talk about one project which is very recent for us, where we were called in by the Ministry of Health and the Statistics Division as a part of the Ministry of Health, which manages what's called the Health Management Information System, HMIS. Which is one of the largest management information systems in the world. There are about 250,000 facilities, healthcare facilities in India across all states that use this on a monthly basis to report data into it. So it's collecting that data. There are about 600 indicators that frontline data operators actually input into it, and the data is kind of funneled up to the state and central kind of ministry to take decisions around health investments. And we were called in to really address the challenge around data quality, right? And while one part of the problem clearly is that the system itself, the technological system itself is evolving, and it is it's a journey of incremental evolution. It's been kind of undergoing iterations. The other part of the challenge was around the use of this system by frontline health workers, and what about their behaviors and understanding of data could be contributing to the data quality issue, right? And so we began our investigation into this by visiting 6 states across the country: Manipur, West Bengal, Bihar, Himachal, Maharashtra, and Tamil Nadu, to understand, even the health systems in all of these 6 states, the maturity of health systems is very different. A couple of things that stood out for us in terms of, just highlighting this aspect of diversity. So, maturity of data systems in all these states being very different, the geographical makeup of all of these states being very different. There's a mountain economy of Himachal, there's a remote northeastern state in Manipur, there is Bihar, and then kind of a more progressive health system like Tamil Nadu. The native language, and of course that being unique and distinct in each state. The cultural norms around gender, a lot of the frontline health workers that you see, especially clinical staff nurses, are women. And the power kind of hierarchy, the dynamics of how power gets negotiated, very different in Bihar as opposed to, let's say, Tamil Nadu. And then, of course, the political leanings of each of these states and how they perceive a central health system, and the investments that the state has made into their own health system, and that kind of friction and tension. So I think the question that it raised for us is, how do you design a central data system when you have such a diverse audience that's using this, right? And I think the start of that journey is to start with the acknowledgement of diversity as a core principle of design. When you start with that assumption, then I think you begin to challenge certain assumptions that are being made in structuring these large systems. So, just as an illustrative example, this idea that how do you what is typical of these data systems is that data gets funneled up, but actually there's no bidirectional flow of data. It doesn't come back to the primary healthcare that has its own kind of norms in terms of how they're managing the day-to-day of that health system, right? And if you were to empower that primary healthcare facility with a window into their own data, possibility is that they'll be able to actually act on that and take certain decisions that does not rely on centralized sort of decision making, right? So we sort of then began to rally the ministry around this idea of bidirectional flow of data, right? And of course, acknowledging that the technology that's in the hands of people there is actually the most common kind of messaging interface, and how do you use that to actually get kind of that data flow going. The second sort of idea that began to come up was the idea of building the capacity. When you look at a staff nurse in Tamil Nadu, where the hospital management system has been under development by the state for the last 12 years, as opposed to a state of Manipur, where they're seeing some, this kind of a technological system for the first time. The capacity around using data, what that means, how does that, reconcile with my duty as a clinical caregiver, it has to be looked at in very different ways, right? So I think these were some sort of notions that began to emerge when you center that diversity in boardrooms and in places where otherwise a lot of these systems are designed around certain overarching assumptions, right? The lowest common denominator. And I feel like increasingly in our work, to Arun, to your point about what is the role of designers, I feel like the role of designers is to center that lived experience, to get that into the room so that people rally around it, make their own kind of learnings of it, and I think the change will happen, right? It's not about us designing the new, generative AI chatbot that's going to do that. It's not the answer. I think the answer is in how do we surface this lived reality in the decision-making process that governs a lot of the system design that we see today, right? And I think that's perhaps the most and the least that designers can do.
Thank you, Ayush. I'm not going to steal much of the time of the audience. I know Praveen and Carlos will be joining us soon here. We had a little bit of delay with Praveen, so we had to make some adjustments. So, and Ayush, thank you for the adjustments. I'll ask for you to stay here with me so we continue the conversation. Soon they will be joining us. But this notion of diversity and scalability is a huge question mark, not only in the field of design, but I think that across all knowledge domains that we have. I mean, the principles that we have adopted and evolved in our knowledge systems that were created in response to the opportunities presented by the economy of scale was this understanding that standardization is a path for scalability. And prediction is a principle for what to standardize.
And I think that right now we are entering an understanding that diversity and responsiveness is much more grounded in reality, not only on this country, but explicitly in this country, right, where the knowledge systems that evolved into the standardization and prediction as principles of knowledge codification have been tried and tried and tried to penetrate the diversity, the strength, and the resilience of diversity of this country, and it's not succeeding. The resiliency here is wonderful. So when I'm walking around and in a room where I hear India is so complex because of its diversity, I say no. It's beautiful because of its diversity. What it's complex is the mind of those thinking that the structure should be, we should fit the context in the structure, right? That's not the way to go. So I think that this is part of the conversations of thinking through the principles and the lenses of design in these terms of this conflictual understanding of scalability and diversity as paradox. If we start bending a little bit that line and not seeing them as opposite, but as a space upon which we can work, we might start expanding our understanding of what's even possible to achieve here. Part of what is Carlos and Praveen, are they coming? Praveen is not yet? Okay. So one of the things that as Carlos and Praveen are joining, one of the things that we wanted to explore in this convening today are basically three aspects of portraying the contributions of design and the context of rural development and development issues here in India. And this notion of design knowledge in the reach of the network and activating capability, but what is that capability and what's the benefit that it's going to deal with? The last part was this notion of design know-how. How do you use design makes a difference. Certain knowledges can be used for harmful or for productive manners, right? So this notion of utilizing this design knowledge capability in a way that recognizes the context and builds upon it, integrates, allows it to emerge in a productive manner. And the third part, which is what Praveen and Carlos will be engaging a little bit more today, is this notion of design practices. And what are the practices that we have developed? Human-centered design, design thinking, and systems design, and understanding how these practices have contributed a lot or have been developed in the context of certain organizational structures. And we have evolved towards the knowledge specialization, efficiency of our operations. We have divided ourselves in multiple structures, siloed structures, boundaries, because only then you can evolve and specialize. Is when you put a focus on and you go deep. If you're broad, it's very hard for you to specialize in that manner. So in government, we've created departments, Department of Health, Department of Transportation, Department of Education, Department of Sanitation. But our lives connect all these things, right? We don't think about, geez, this food comes from the department of this, right? Thank you for that. And not only that, but also the types of issues, right? Who is responsible for dealing with the growth of obesity in India? Is it the Department of Health? Is it the Department of Food? Is it the Transportation? Is it the Education? How do we deal with this? Right, so part of the effort that Praveen has been exploring in literally exploring bringing design knowledge is how do we understand some of that capability in terms of bridging silos within the government. And when we say bridging, we don't mean dismantle. Right? There's a reason for it, and there's the benefits of it, but really strategic understanding how to bridge some of these silos. And on that, Carlos has been deeply dedicated to exploring what are these collaborative practices
when design is shifting from this notion, or not shifting, but expanding from this notion of creating a particular product to solve a particular problem of a particular organization into these more systemic issues where you have multiple stakeholders acting at the same time, control is basically non-existent, diversity is a given. So how do we deal with that? So Carlos, I'll shift it up to you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your flexibility and patience in pushing a little bit further your time and contributions here. And yep, I'll leave it to you. Thank you, Tim. Well, Carlos is, let me just first introduce Carlos in this sense. Carlos is the director of the PhD program at the Institute of Design in Chicago, where he also has a endowed chair position of Charles Owens Professor of Systems Design, and he is also a director of the Sustainable Solutions of the Action Labs. So Carlos, and also he was my advisor on my PhD, together with that. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, Andrea. Good afternoon, good evening for everyone over there. Great pleasure to be here. I wish I was there. I've been several times. Nice to see you, Sonia, and reconnect also with Andrea. Thanks for the opportunity to speak for such an incredible audience and people that does incredible work. So I'm going to try to hopefully I will be able to say something meaningful to an audience that is already very knowledgeable and very high profile and be able to achieve very successful results. But as Andrea said, I'm a director of the PhD program at the Institute of Design. I have about 25 years of professional experience as a consultant, as a professor, as a researcher. And in the past, I had the opportunity to work with Sonia on the Dream In project more than 10 years ago, and had the opportunity to interact with the Indian culture, visit, travel, and engage with several people. So I'm very, I would claim that I have a little bit of exposure, not much knowledge about the context in India, but has traveled a lot and seen a lot. With all that said, let me bring a perspective to the discussions that you are having at this moment. From the point of view that I stand, from a design point of view, when I look at the complex problems and challenges that we are facing, and the ones that are being discussed within this group, issues of, for example, preventive healthcare. There are other issues such as energy exchange. So what is going to be the new types of exchanges in energy? Issues related to cashless payment, how our economies and our daily lives are going to be transformed once we move into digital payments. We can also talk about issues on mass media, such as ethical, tech, and mass media. So there are several issues that are very tangible in our daily life where each one of us are having to handle. So let me give one specific example where, from a design point of view, that I think that can be applied to many others. So take something very familiar to all of you, which is Facebook. And if you take the example of something that has become very famous from a design point of view, which is the like button. The button that anyone clicks, it's prickless, anyone can express their opinion about something and generate an input of a data to a larger audience. So the like button happens at one level where you can easily express your like or dislike about something. But this is not an innocent move. From that one, you can think about the like button start to connect you into an echo chamber. Connect you with the people that like the same thing and disconnect you from the people that dislike that same thing. So now you start to create different groups of like and dislike, and you create this echo chamber where people are now not being exposed to different opinions. People are being all clustered around the same thing. And then you start to see a lot of the lack of discussion and diversity in public opinions about several topics. But this is the algorithm. So we move from the like button, this very simple button, visual, elegant design, into the algorithm, into the programming that creates that kind of environment. But this is only allowed and possible because of the privacy policy around data. So now we have an issue of regulations, privacy, that allows people to use data for creating understanding of those users, aggregating that data, and using for business purpose. So I'm using this example because we can go from a very basic level of interaction design into the algorithm, into the policy and regulation level. This is the type of complexities that designers today are facing, but most of the time designers are working only at the level of the interaction, the like button. And so what I believe that designers can contribute much more is to start thinking about products and services, not at the level of the user and interaction, but at the system level. Thinking about those solutions as they relate to the larger systems where they exist. So the like button exists in the larger context of data privacy, in the larger context of how we aggregate data, how we facilitate conversations of multiple groups, and we create either fake news or information for people to use. So if you think about Facebook and the role of fake news or mass media or that happened during the pandemic, this is an example of understanding products and services in the larger context of systems. So this is where most of my work is happening, and most of the discussion that I believe designers should move on is to think about products and services at the intersection of multiple systems. I gave you the example of the Facebook, the like button, because it's something very familiar to all of you. Now let's shift into a different context. So let's think that from the context and point of view of, for example, healthcare and preventive healthcare. Let's think for a second how people make appointment to see a doctor. So a doctor's appointment and the whole interaction, as well as data systems and programs that exist, and policies, insurance that exists behind making an appointment. The social norms through which a doctor's appointment is done. Who does that in the family? Is the mom? Is the father? What is the couple is divorced? What is about the child? So what type of appointment is done by whom depends also on the type of disease or care that you're looking for. So there is a lot of sensitive issues. So I'm trying to show one single example, which is scheduling a doctor's appointment can be seen by the visual, the interaction, the user experience. But if you start putting that in the larger context, you're going to start to deal with issues of diversity, of inclusion, of the economics of healthcare, and so forth. So this is something that the type of work that I've been suggesting, is that every time that we are confronting those big challenges from a point of view of design, we can bring that into very specific infrastructures. I'm calling those infrastructures like button or scheduling a doctor's appointment. Those are contemporary, very challenging infrastructures that we are designing to serve large populations. And the moment that we can focus on those infrastructures and start thinking them in the larger context of multiple systems, then we are bringing those complexes into the design of everyday life. And that's where I believe we can have very big impact. So the one example that I have done here in the past in the US is a project that we worked on meal delivery for seniors. There is an increased growth and diversity of senior population, and they are becoming more and more isolated. And there is a project here about food security, providing 3 meals a day for seniors. And we're working with the largest NGO, Feeding America, to identify how to enhance that service. So Feeding America can serve any meal to anyone around the United States, but they were surprised that they could not achieve most of the seniors. So they have this big challenge. So we're working on a project like that, and we identified that the big challenge was the last mile of food delivery. So it was not about getting donations, it was about delivering to the senior at their home a meal that they were ready to eat. So that was the biggest challenge. If you provide them with a can, but they have arthritis and they cannot open the can, how good is that food for them? So working on the last mile of food delivery was the biggest challenge. The next step is going to be working with Andrea on the Bharat clinics, and we are looking forward for the opportunity to exploring this big challenge on preventive healthcare, on scheduling doctor's appointment or doctor's visits. So this is the type of work that we are doing, and I'm really looking forward to work with Andrea and many of you on this challenge of preventive healthcare in rural India, tackling this very large system, but by looking at products and service at multiple scales involving multiple stakeholders. Andrea, I finish here to open the conversation.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, I believe that we are having some issues in connectivity with Praveen. So we'll continue the conversation with us. And I think it's an interesting point of view in that sense when you really, if you look at each one of these issues, they're daunting on their own, right? But even if you start to think about them visually, there's this Venn diagram, right? When you overlap one circle over the other. If you start overlapping them, you start getting into narrow and narrow and narrow areas where an intervention might actually help all of them if you are able to engage at the intersection of them. If you look at each system by themselves, they might be daunting, but there are things that overlap and are connected in them. So finding these intersections and understanding them as a source of exploration and a source of understanding, not only activities that are happening at that level, at the liking button or the scheduling appointment, but activities at the top, higher level, whatever level you want to be exploring. So understanding this multi-level interconnectivities of different levels and then the integration of these multiple systems gives us a potential way of engaging, bringing design to that conversation as well. I think that's one of the interesting point here, because that becomes the context upon which you might strategically identify areas where silos across government, for example, can be breached in response to that intersection of systems in people's activities on the ground. What is happening? How do you think about, instead of flipping, instead of thinking about how to bridge and then understand what can be done, it's a response, it's a reflective of what's happening on the ground. And I think that part of that not only exists in government, right? We also have some of that in across different sectors. In the social sector, we have that. In the corporate sector, we have that. So I'll pick a little bit on Yulima's brain and experience here to share a little bit on what's her take on this notion of dealing with complex social challenges within the corporate world and understanding how might we strategically respond to some of these challenges. Thank you, Yulima.
Thank you very much, Andre, and good morning, Carlos, and good evening, everyone here. I just want to build on something that Carlos said and that you said just now, Andre. So, Carlos, you said something about think of products and services at a systems level and at the intersection of multiple systems. And then, Andre, you picked on that word intersections. And I just want to build on the intersectionality among systems. So in the last 10 years in the country, and I've been, let's say, in this broad space of social development for 4 decades now. And in the last 1 decade, maybe spurred by regulation, and maybe that was the reason why players came to the table. But you now see corporates have come to the table, non-profits come to the same table, and government comes to the same table. So around a shared purpose for different reasons, let's say, but people are sharing a table, and there is some kind of a shared purpose that they are trying to push. That in itself is hard, because first of all, there is no equality on that table, and so that makes it hard because so there's no equality at the table. There's also different things that we are wanting to take away from that collaboration. Everyone's driving agenda, everyone's urges and impulses for coming to that collaboration are different. And yet you want to kind of, some of us, of course, then choose to walk away from the table and say, we are better off doing it on our own, but some stay at the table. I don't want to make it long. The point that I want to make it is that even in the best cases where these 3 different systems coming together push the shared agenda forward. And I'm saying that's happening in very few cases, but even in the best cases, if it happens, and if you are limited in that to only what you said, Andre, the overlap area of the Venn diagram. So to me, that coming together is still a transactional coming together. It is rare to have 3 systems come together. And we are operating at a suboptimal level, in the best case scenario. In most cases, I'm saying we are not even operating at that level. But in the best case scenario, we are only working to further the overlap agenda. So we've all come together, let's say government and non-profit and the corporate have come together, let's say to improve the health system or to improve the education system. So it's that little intersectionality that we are. But I'm saying, when do you always get an opportunity for 3 very different systems to come together? And are we missing an opportunity to learn from each other as a system? And there is so much to learn just from understanding how another system operates, and not just understanding in a kind of a academic sense, but I'm saying for the greater good of society, if these 3 major systems do not understand each other and do not respect. So I just wanted to put that on the table, Andre, and I really hope that there are ways in which design, and I am now never going to use the word thinking, but how design can help us not lose this opportunity and to not stay just at the suboptimal level, but to go deeper. So thank you. I am really enjoying it. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you. Carlos, you want to share some thoughts around this notion of transaction and relationships, and expanding further the intersections of the systems and the influence that they might bring to existing systems, so extending some of these potential, not only looking at the shared value area as an area of intervention, but then how do we then start understanding what is that system value that we can tap into if we are able to expand our understanding of the benefits of those collaborations in response to the context. Right?
So several different points, but I hope we will be able to connect them. One is that the challenge that we are discussing is my understanding that they are challenged for large organizations, government agencies, big corporations, civic sector. So this is not about designing a product, this is about designing at this intersection. So the resources that are required there of a significant scale that can only be brought by the level of expertise and capacity and funding from large organizations. So I think that we have to keep that in mind once we shift the scale of designing a small innovation that can be done by venture capital, innovation, startups, or even a corporation to the intersections where only large-scale organizations can tackle that kind of problem. A second thing is that although those intersections can be seen as very narrow, the example of the like button and social media exchange, the example of a doctor's appointment, they are something that affect large populations. So they are just a small node at the intersection of multiple systems, but they give us access to how to take care of populations. So my second point is this notion of thinking in terms of care-driven design, that we identify everyday infrastructures that impact the life of large populations, and we start to identify how this node could be redesigned and have an impact on the multiple systems. So if I talk about a doctor's appointment, this has to do with the insurance, the rights to healthcare access, to who has priority to have access. So scheduling priorities, the data privacy. And so it goes on and on and on, the multiple nodes, the multiple systems that relate to that specific aspect. But what comes back is this notion that we start from the daily life of people and we enter the other systems for them to adapt, to be able to take care of what are changing. And that brings to my last point, which is prototyping. We have considered prototyping as something that happens at the scale of products and services and testing products. But I think we have to start prototyping large-scale interventions. If we can redesign the doctor's appointment, we can start redesigning the system for which people have preventive health care. So this is an entry point for taking care of populations by prototyping those large-scale transformations. And I think design can play a major role by working with large organizations from multiple sectors at this prototyping those intersections and understanding the intended and unintended consequence of the designs that we are putting in place, because they are very complex and they go far beyond what we usually understand what might be those impacts. Like the social media was intended to connect people and then ended up separating people and creating more disruption. So we need to really think through that and prototyping those intersections and understanding the ripple effect of those interventions is a way that design can collaborate with the other disciplines to those large-scale challenges.
Yeah. And on the sort of like on the complementary aspect of this working at intersections of large organizations, Amjad here, also working with TRI and leading work on the ground with cluster level federations, self-help groups, village organizations, is now asking similar questions, but then at that scale of the village, and understanding how different organizations are currently working within their own sort of like sphere and structure of realm of influence, if you will, can have impact or generate intended and unintended outcomes for the same village. So how can they start understanding even and building the institutional capacity to achieve shared goals? But instead of sort of like segmenting some of these things, oh, it's a woman issue, go to cluster level, right? It became a point of go-to rather than integrating into some of these governing discussions. So I think, Amjad, do you want to just share a little bit some of those questions that you've been asking, and we can go from there.
Thank you, Amjad. So in TRI, we started with the same belief, like we should start with the aspiration of the community, and then we have to design something to achieve that. So for that, we have designed processes we call visioning, community visioning. And fortunately, government of our nation has adopted that process. Right now, at every village of the nation is expected to have this visioning exercise. So I think, more than 30,000 such organizations are organizing these kind of events. So they have vision, they have change dimension, they have already identified what dimension of change they require to achieve their well-being. Now the issue is, this is the one part of the community. And as we define this community like shared a standard culture or behavior in a locality, so in that particular locality, apart from women, there are young, there are leaders, there are, representative of rural, this administrative system. So now challenge is how to have shared vision where they can express their dreams, where they can explore, where they can experiment, and similarly how they can extend this similar kind of experience to neighboring blocks. So in this scenario, how design, this whole design thing can help us to have that kind of things in our villages.
Just to add to this, Carlos, exactly what you were saying, that there is this potential for creating alternate resilient, a model for alternate resilient communities on the ground, which are multiple systems. One is the community systems, the other is the local bodies, and third is the government public system delivery happening in remote local areas. So the effort which Amjad is leading is to do these prototypes. So we have identified 5 different geographies in multiple states, very different contexts from each other, and trying to see how these people who have possibly dispersed goals, as Nilima was talking about, in the corporate communities and the government systems having very different end goals in their mind. Similarly, at a very micro local level, the community institutions, the local body leaders, and the public system last mile functionaries have very different goals. But unless they come together, the communities change and the transformation at villages are not going to happen. So the whole effort to work with this whole initiative with Andre and Amjad are looking at creating these prototypes in very different contexts across the poverty regions of the country, and hopefully if we have a way forward, then it has the potential to impact almost 6,500 villages across India. So that's the context, and I'm great. It was great for you to say that those kind of prototyping is required before you come up with these kind of design solutions which can impact at scale. Back to you, Andre.
Andrea, if I just may
Please.
Point here. The conversations are pointing out a very important role that design can and must play in these developments, which is the ability of creating choices. Patrick Wheaton is here, and he's the one that has constantly said that organizations are very well structured to make decisions. They are all organized to maximize the capacity of making decisions for their own benefit. This is the role of corporations and organizations. So decision-making is the primary role of those organizations. What organizations are not that good at, it's creating choices. So the role that design and those prototyping activities can have is to think at those intersections and creating choices where leaders like all of you can make better decisions. A lot today is based on the decisions that people have in front of them, which tend to be limited to the chance that they have. If design can bring more choices and more options and prototype and give better information and choices and options for the decision makers to make decisions, I think design has done a great contribution into those challenges.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carlos, and I'm going to put the question to you. It's a reflection on what we have been hearing so far, the first session included, and the comments, very important comments made. Ayush and Sonia, you highlighted the need for the conversations at the ground level where people are talking, as you said, about a common, their carings, their aspirations, and not about their needs, So it's the conversation in which you're understanding the things that we usually don't look for. We, in a scientific way, don't look for that. We look for needs and the gaps in their needs. Okay. Now, we did say, as you said, these are large-scale problems, and therefore large-scale organizations are required to come together to find big solutions to these problems. And Neelam has mentioned that when these large organizations come together, and thank goodness they are in here and there, corporations who are able to collect large amounts of financial resources, governments who have a large amount of legitimate political power and authority resources, and then we have now think tanks and international NGOs also, developing think tanks and ideas, which is knowledge resources on a large scale. These three are, as she said, there is a power dynamic amongst them also. What are they going to each get out of this? What is missing is that these solutions are supposed to be for the community. So on that table, to have the community at the center, and the community able to, if it is able to conduct its discussions to say what we as a community collectively will create for ourselves, for which we might need some assistance. What is that assistance? So the quality of that conversation at the community level to enable the community to participate on that table with power equal to the rest. And I would say not just that, the community should be at the center of the discussions of the other three. It's always absent. And so I think the solution of the design is to help design the conversations in which the power is recognized, but we have to allow people who today have less power to be heard. And this at the global level with G20 coming very, very clearly. With climate change, this is the problem. So, but the problem will have to be locally solved because, like you said, the diversity, there cannot be a global solution. So at the local levels everywhere, if people can learn to listen to each other, to come to a collective, to feel like we have this common problem, the commons here, and then the next level must be very humbly letting them be on the table and sitting on the side and say, what are you discussing, what can we learn from you? It's a very different paradigm of learning and supporting change.
If I may comment here, I very much appreciate your comment, and I totally agree and align with that. What I would add to your observation is that we had, from a design point of view, we had that in the past, which was participatory design, and we also had the human-centered design, bringing the users, the community, giving them the voice. I think this has helped tremendous, but this is not enough. I think what we are talking here, and what I believe you're also mentioning, is true representation with power. So it's not only having a voice, but having the power to make decisions and the right representation at that table. So in very practical terms, I have been thinking a lot about that. And I think that we can bring community leaders and communities and work with them, but we are working with them in the part of the choice making and having them the voice on the choice making, but not on the decision making, because they are not part of that. So at least from my point of view, when I'm thinking from a university point of view, one of my biggest challenge and motivations these days, it's about how do I prepare the next generation of leaders? How do I bring the people from all walks of life and representatives from those communities and empower them with the education, master level design, PhD level, that now, for example, we can bring someone like a Native American from an indigenous tribe population to engage in the doctoral level research and about climate change and be able to bring it back that expertise and be in leadership roles in organization. So for example, imagine if we can bring someone that from an indigenous background to work on weather forecasting and work on a media company to diversify the way that we present weather forecasting. So this idea of true representation at the decision making with people from all walks of life that can identify blind spots in our research and our solutions and bring new perspectives into the decision making. But they need to have power to make decisions, not only to be heard. So I think that the big challenge is how do we bring diversity into the decision-making process at the highest level of leadership. I totally agree with that, and I highly support that.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've been exploring with the work of Amjad is centered around this notion of power and the ability of increasing the power when these organizations are able to find a common ground. Otherwise, or share goals, as we were saying, because otherwise effort and resources get distributed and they continue to be recipients of consequences of decision making being made at other levels instead of part of that process. You wanna say?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for bringing power into the conversation. I was just waiting for that. And Carlos, also to your point about large-scale interventions and prototyping, I mean, we've had a slightly different approach to that. So in our work in entrepreneurship, what we call inclusive entrepreneurship, what we've been designing or prototyping, there's two kinds of prototypes. One is enterprise prototypes, new models designed with the community, and the other is what we call systemic prototypes. So our approach to the systemic change, where we're trying to look at cultural aspects of entrepreneurship, inclusion, building the ecosystem, is these systemic prototypes that are created bottom up with the communities, where they have a very strong voice in it. At the district level, for example, if there's a coalition with for entrepreneurship, do entrepreneurs have a strong voice in that? Because our approach has been that it will never be one prototype or one solution that will actually change the system. It's actually these micro movements of change that are triggered by these prototypes, these systemic prototypes. And I think how to sort of, whether to have a ready framework for that, I think we do need to have a larger conversation. I think power is an important one. Are the power structures changing or not? Just in listening itself, when you're listening and you're saying that you're sort of helping people participate, are you just listening to them or having a dialogue, or are your processes enabling you to create a discourse between the communities themselves, negotiate their realities? And I think that's very important. I mean, this is something that's always hit home for me, which is that the system is larger than the parts of the system, but the parts of the system also can be larger than the system. And so, I mean, that's an approach that I would think we could say. So relationships, power structures, flows, how do you sort of unlock flows where people have access to it, as well as, I think, identity and agency is an important one as well.
No, definitely. I see that we are getting to the point of lots of hands and people very excited about engaging the conversation. Love to engage in that conversation from the point of view, even the models and the approaches that we're taking. We're looking exactly in a very similar manner from the point of view of the organization. So how do you change from within and understand enterprises and organizational models and or the different parts of the organization. But then also looking from this notion of asset-based approach. And what are the available assets in the systems? And assets is not only necessarily environmental assets, right? Like yesterday they were talking about 5 different types of capitals. The way that we approach is with 8 different types of capitals and understanding that as a way of understanding assets. And then how can they be combined and how can they be understood? This notion of parts being smaller than the system reflects very much the understanding that we had evolved in systems thinking, which is very much engineered based, where we understand the whole system and deconstruct in all of its parts, attribute functions and hierarchy to it, and expect it from each one of them to function in the way that they are expected or being designed for. But when you start looking at the intersections of these systems, the parts themselves start forming other systems with other parts. And that starts to become a much more ecological way of understanding systems rather than an engineering based of understanding. And then design of these interventions need to reflect much more of that ecological view than the engineering view. I'm not talking about disciplines, I'm just talking about a way of understanding systems.
I wanted to circle back to Amjad and really what you said about listening and conversations is very important. One of the things we learned in Dreamen and Carlos, you remember that, is that we realized that if you demonstrate to leaders that versus a top-down approach, which is an approach of authority, the inside-out approach can be beautiful as well. So it's a demonstration that an inside-out approach can be beautiful. So, for instance, when we sent the dream catchers out, they found a young man who was partially blind and wanted to be a bureaucrat. And he said, our system is not designed for people like me to be a bureaucrat. And the students insisted on bringing him over to the conclave and putting him on the stage with the bureaucrat and letting them debate this. So it became playful, but it was very serious. So sometimes, that sort of thing where it's about, you demonstrate to leaders that it's about inside out. That each person's view, that independent agency that they have, and what they can inform with has value. And when they see that and they realize that, well, they're not just leaders, they're also catalysts. So there's a lot of value in that if you can negotiate that sort of shift.
Just 2 quick points. So one is in terms of the vocabulary that we are using. I think it might be useful to have one more reference, which is Alvin Toffler, which he had coined this term called prosumer almost half a century back, that people will be in future would be producing as well as consuming simultaneously and contemporaneously, etc. I mean, internet itself was supposed to be one of those things, but then slowly people started becoming more users than producers. But with social media, etc., we are seeing a little bit of that, not too much, but a little bit of that. So that's one. Second thing is, Sonia, in terms of millets, I just want to mention one specific aspect. So I've attended some of these G20 events, of course, more than almost 200 would be over in another month or so by that time. But the interesting thing is, in every single event, no matter what the topic is, no matter what the location is, there are always a few dishes made of millets in each and every course. So whether it's breakfast, lunch, dinner, anything, even snacks for that matter. And about half of them are traditional, which are well known, and about half of them are new. So I think that's another way for people to see that there's also this whole continuum of both the traditional as well as the new innovation which is coming in the way. I just hope that some of these innovative dishes, etc., which are being tried, perhaps after the G20 is over, maybe India should also produce some sort of a G20, not just about the some sort of corpus of millet, what type of millets are there, but also perhaps the recipe books for that. Because from the user's perspective, that's something which will be much more useful rather than just knowing okay what the different type of millets are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'd just like to sort of get some more reflections on one issue that is that I was not understood. I think. That is this question of power. You know, one of the examples that was given in this conversation was of the design of the data, health data, and the MI, health MI. Now I work a lot with a lot of my work is focused on people working, government persons working at the grassroots. So one of the things that I find universal across my work is that the truth is that the data is actually desired by centralized agencies because that is their only way of knowing it. They don't even use it very well. And at the grassroots, it both causes a lot of harassment because manpower is short. And it takes the grassroots worker away from their core job. Okay. So I have recently done an evaluation for the government of Andhra Pradesh where the health workers say non-stop that if only I could not have to submit data and report and if only I could work. So whenever, no matter how much you are trying to be inclusive or whatever, when you design, when you design, I really don't see how you can deal with power from it. Because somewhere there is a locus somewhere, okay? Even if it is in the designer themselves. That, I mean, from somewhere the ripples are flowing. And there is a kind of center somewhere. And you can go on talking. You can say that, okay, while designing the data, maybe one should have looked, first of all, whether this data should be collected at all. So it's not a question of designing data in a diversified way, looking at, but whether, what does this data mean to you? It is a certain kind of harassment to the lower level functioning. And even the idea, excuse me, I'm not criticizing, but giving the data back to the person who's on the ground, they know it. They don't need the data back. In fact, I was once working in education where also this great sort of thing was made that we collect the data and then give it back to the schools and let them have a look at this data and then they will discuss the data and then they will say that, yeah, this is how we should go about it. They know it. They are the ones who are telling it. So, but I mean, I only illustrate this that I still can't see very clearly in this sort of discussion how you handle power. Because to me it seems that there is a kind of assumption of shared interests, which is rarely the, I mean, it's true in some cases, but in many cases it's not. And I still can't clearly how you do it.
So I think that is a. Are you around? You wanna share a little bit? I don't know if you heard about the questions where you're busy with the. It was around data and the systems of where decision lies when data is collected. So data being collected on the ground. Please correct me if I'm not reflecting what your intentions were, but this notion of data being collected on the ground about things that people that are doing work on the ground already know the issue, but then overloading them with many tasks of data collection, going up, making decisions, and then just sort of like, so that as a form of power and decision making. So information systems from the design point of view, right, as a top-down and distributed activities in response to the systems as a way. So how do you deal with power from that point of view? Is that correct?
you know, about when people with very different access to resources of various kinds are sitting together on the table. I really, I have a little trouble in matching design with it, because how does it, so that's a more general question. I don't want to have a specific.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I was meaning to kind of come in also on that point, because so one, recognizing that, and I speak for the community of design, that the seat at the table that design is getting is a privilege that design needs to understand. And it is perhaps for the first time that a discipline that is rooted in user experience, in kind of representing the lives and context of people that systems and solutions serve, it's the first time that a discipline has the responsibility and the space to be able to truly represent that. And the problem there is that I think speaking truth to power is not something that design is trained on, right? And therefore, even when we talk about, if I go back to the example of, the public health data system, when we played back what was happening on the ground, that was a challenge to the system designers that were running a large-scale, centralized system. And therefore, to be able to negotiate that is a responsibility that has to be taken, and because you are brokers of that sort of that conversation. So I feel like, and which is why I continuously, like, I feel that while there is a lot of potential for what design can do, I feel like there isn't necessarily the skills, the understanding even of how you kind of carry that responsibility into spaces which can fundamentally transform and change. So I think that bit of, that's a training that we need to do, and that can only happen when you actually when you're in those circumstances where you have to speak truth to power and you have to represent the true voice of the community. And so exactly that point, that currently data systems are only increasing chores on data workers, right? But it's, if you were able to kind of demonstrate the power of that data and the ability of these data workers to act on their own data, I think there'll be a different relationship with these systems. But that's not the design of these systems to begin with. So, in a nutshell.
Thank you, Ayush. What I'm going to propose is that we close the session, as we are very excited and enthused to continue to exchange these conversations, and moving into more informal gathering. And then I would love to extend this conversation with you. I think we've had a couple. We don't have any answers, of course. There is no single silver bullet, because power is manifested in so many different ways in different situations. But I think there has been attempts, and some of them successful attempts, from the type of work that all of us have been developed. So I think it would be fantastic to continue this conversation. Just want to remind ourselves that we started engaging with this, that started today with in this beautiful place, talking about design knowledge and the formalization of design knowledge in the sense of capability being distributed, right? Design capability being distributed all over the place, but then not having that proper way of activating in that sense. We shift to this notion of standardization and diversity as paradox, and how design know-how might be able to engage in that. And then extending to this notion of collaboration from the point of view of design, meaning how can we look at the intersections of systems and interconnectivity of levels as a way to think through and understand how potentially the interactions, the engagements, the activities of people that use these systems are already interconnected and are already linked to these multiple levels. So how can we then reflect our organizations in response to that? And finally, we ended up, we're taking it to the next level, the conversations around power and understanding how can systems within rural development enable power redistribution, enable an understanding of decision making as a step within the systems design process, upon which a lot of intended and unintended consequences happen. And whenever we have greater diversity at that step, we can reduce the risk of the unintended consequences that we have been experiencing throughout these decades of try and error. And lastly, as Carlos was referring to, prototyping as a way of expanding the choices within that decision-making process, so that we can actually expand the perceptions of the impact and the opportunities that we have to create value for ourselves, for other stakeholders that we work with, for the environment as a whole. So thank you very much. Thank you, Ayush, for hosting us. Thank you, Sona. Thank you, TRI. Thank you, the participants online. Thank you, Carlos, for joining us from the US, and to Sarah and Patrick as well. Thank you very much, and we'll be moving into the informal gathering. Thank you.
Just a quick note on, so the bar is open. It's going to remain open for another 30 to 45 minutes. So please grab a drink, hydrate yourselves. We'll turn on the fans finally, so we'll have a little bit more breeze. I do want to point out that, you know, in creating this experience, food has had a very key role, and there is our friend and longtime partner Kaushik, who has curated the whole menu. Do find him as we move around. He is a master of his craft. There's a lot of thought that went into it. I hope you enjoyed the food, enjoyed the experience overall. Kaushik, do you want to say something?
When we just
Okay, as people move around, and yeah, as well, your cars are probably parked kind of at the front gate. It's a little dark, so just be a little cautious as you're walking out. But I think we do have lights along the way. But please do grab a drink before you go. And I think there is one last course that Kaushik has put together, which is just going to be circulated as you move around. Thank you once again for joining us at Sanskriti, in this beautiful place, and hope to keep meeting all of you. Hope to continue these conversations that we started. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Trif, for giving us this opportunity.